Clapton has one. So does Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin. In his workshop a little south of Raleigh, Terry McInturff builds custom and handmade electric guitars. Keith Weston recently chatted with McInturff, who says he first fell in love with the sound of the guitar by listening to top 40 radio stations in the 1960s.
I think it started Christmas of 1967 when my dear dad gave me a little GE transistor radio, one of the old-fashioned type. It was about the size of a pack of cigarettes, and had a little earphone you could plug in so I could listen to it when I was supposed to be sleeping. And I was listening to the AM stations in Chicago. I lived in a Chicago suburb, and you could turn on the radio and hear Wilson Pickett, could be just little. There might be another song following after that was completely different, something really silly like, yummy, yummy, I got love in my tummy. And I'm listening to that at 12 years old thinking, well, I don't really like that. Once in a while they'd play a little surf song. They would have guitar in it, but it was very... and on, stuff like that, listening away on my new transistor radio. And then all of a sudden there was... I'm like, what the heck is that?
I've been waiting so long to be where I'm going in the sun.
That's wonderful. I mean, there's obviously one guitar and a bass and a drummer, playing their hearts out, and the guitar sounds kind of fuzzy and stuff, and this is exciting. It was, and Dad yelled up the stairs. I distinctly remember him saying, "Turn that noise down," which made me like it all the more. My God, I'd never heard a guitar sound like it. It was almost sounding like a violin. I asked Dad, next time you go into town, could we go to Woolworth's department store so I could try to find this record that I heard on my new radio? Well, sure, son. The album happened to be called Disraeli Gears, and the album cover was psychedelic and had bright colors and long-haired guys, and climbed back in the car, and Dad looked at the guys on the album cover and said, who on earth are these young men? Which... made me kind of like it a little bit as well. And, that was the first album I ever got, was the Cream Disraeli Gears. And these wonderful players really became my heroes.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to understand at this distance, but back then, some of us young kids worshiped these fellows much like a kid might worship, sports hero now. They were really important. We'd follow them, we'd go see them, we'd read about them, and in my case, I'd try to play like them.
When did you start actually making and building guitars? When did that come along?
Well, that came along shortly after high school. I graduated from high school not knowing what I wanted to do, and I read an article in Guitar Player magazine about a gentleman in California that repaired guitars for a living, and I think he built guitars as well. And with some help from Mom and Dad, sent myself to take a short course in Arizona at a guitar building school. Mm-hmm. It was only a 4-month course. That's a very brief time to learn how to build guitars. But I walked out of there with a couple objects with strings on them and got a job in a music store in Chapel Hill, and guitars have paid my bills ever since.
What are some of the special characteristics of your guitars that make them popular with guitarists?
Guitar players tend to be very conservative, actually. So when people come to me and express interest in my guitar, I think part of the reason that they seem to be attractive is that they can feel a little bit at home with them. There is a sort of vintage, classic character about them with what I feel are refinements to the classic designs. We don't build so many guitars that we can't coddle and baby each one, so people seem to appreciate the fact that they're made with a little bit more attention to detail, perhaps.
Well, who are some of your customers? Who are some of the big names who have purchased your guitars over the years?
Well, I've had the distinct honor of building a guitar for the guy that did play that "Sunshine of Your Love" song. Eric Clapton owns one of my guitars, and also another band that made Dad yell for me to turn it down was Led Zeppelin. So it was a distinct honor indeed to build a guitar, meet Jimmy Page, and build him a guitar, and speak to him after he received the guitar, and he loved it, thank goodness, and also other projects for younger bands such as Linkin Park, my dear friend Audley Freed of the Black Crowes, Aerosmith, etc.
When these guitarists come to you, do they already have some ideas? They say they're looking for a certain sound, they want to recapture a certain feel, and it's your job to sort of listen to what they want and then create a custom guitar from that?
That's one scenario. Sometimes they want to see what I come up with on my own with no coaching whatsoever. Sometimes the guitar tech or the artist will contact me with more specific ideas in mind. But I would say that most of the time, I do what I like and hope they like it, and thank God, quite often they seem to like it. Yeah. I do ask them preferences for the neck shape, how big the neck is on their other favorite guitars. I try to get cues about what type of strings they prefer. I'll go back and listen to all their recordings to get cues from there, and then I'll choose the materials and set to work.
Is there a Terry McInturff sound to your guitars?
I'm told that there is. Many famous electric guitars of the past had one or two really good sounds. That was about it. And I wanted to create a guitar that had a wider variety of useful sounds based in, the famous vintage instruments. For instance, I'm not capable of playing guitar very well, but if I was a jazz player or a blues player, I might prefer to get a nice, warm, clear sound. And I might want to get a little clearer version of that. So there we have two sounds. Now we can start getting a little more articulation in the sound. While I was playing, I was starting to move through some of the 7 or 10 different sounds that the guitar will produce, but a lot of the articulation is already built into the guitar by means of its overall design. I want a guitar that sounds big and full, but not get lost in the wash of the band. It has its own place in the sonic stage. I'm trying to build a good tool that's versatile.
Similar to wine, guitars and guitarists have sort of a special lexicon of words that they use to describe their guitar. You've mentioned here, you're talking about the warm articulation. There's complexity of a sound, sometimes a stratty sound, crunch, and then there's my personal favorite, the oomph.
Oomph, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, how well defined are some of these terms? And if somebody comes in and if somebody says to you they need something with a little more oomph, do you know what they're talking about?
Not always. The guitar, the rock and roll guitar has its own history, customs, and language, and there are a lot of terms that are unique to the field, but some of them are way open to interpretation. Oomph has kind of a sound to it, so we may want something that's got some oomph. But another guy's version of oomph might be Pete Townsend, who says he wants, so you just have to delve a little further to find out what people are trying to talk about with some of these terms.
Yeah. I've read somewhere that in the factory where you build these guitars, you've installed sort of a mini nightclub. Now, what's the idea there? What's the purpose of having that in a guitar factory?
Well, aside from being my favorite part of the shop where I can go and play and have fun with my toys, it really is a good R&D tool because, as I just mentioned, Keith, I view them as tools that are made to fit into a combo setting. So what better way to test my prototype designs and ideas but to have the drum set being used? I have drums, bass, amplifier, speakers, microphones, guitar amplifiers. We can actually strike up the band, and I can test the sound of any prospective, design against in a real world working environment. I can also record it and listen back to it to see how it works. Probably 2 or 3 times a year, something will come along that I'm going to want to check out. And in fact, I'm in the middle of testing what might become a new product right now. It's out in the field being tested by some artists right now.
So it's a new design, new guitar design?
Yes, it's a new design, and it's not radically different than the other instruments, but it definitely has its own sound and feel.
What are the component parts of the guitar?
We have 2 pieces that comprise the carved top that sort of looks like the carve on a violin top, say. And we have a piece of mahogany on the back that the top is glued on to. And we have a 1-piece mahogany neck. That's the part that the musician holds with his left hand and presses the strings down on the neck to make the notes. And we have an East Indian rosewood fretboard. That's the part that has the frets in it directly under the strings. And finally, we have a matching piece of figured maple on the tip of the headstock here, the face of the headstock that matches the top of the body down below, for a total of 6 pieces of wood.
What would they expect to pay for something like this?
In the case of a McInturff guitar, the guitars can range all the way up to $10,000. And I brought an example with me today of one of those exceedingly expensive guitars. It's called the Tree of Life model, and it has well over 100 pieces of hand inlay mother of pearl and Paua shell and abalone shell that comprises a pretty intricate inlay pattern on the neck and headstock of the guitar.
It's a pretty impressive sight to see. It has a visual impact as well as an audio impact too. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. The people that invest in one of the Tree of Life type guitars, which is an example, of course, of one of my fancier models, tend to view them as somewhat of an art piece as well as a guitar. And I really appreciate that, and I enjoy building the guitars. But I think, my main love is to build guitars for people that get out there and get up on stage and, play music with a band. And, I still view them as tools. Even the $10,000 one has to be built so that it can withstand, a tour with The Who and still stay in tune, or it's just not worth making.
Are you currently in the process of designing something for any star guitarists now?
I've got a little bit of an unusual project underway. It just so happens that my parents live in central New Hampshire, about 10 miles from the old nightclub where Aerosmith got their start back in the late 60s. And on a whim, I located the place. It's called the Barn Nightclub. It's been closed for over 30 years, and it's still standing. I met the owner, and I was allowed to go in, and it was really pretty neat. The stage was still there. The little bar was still there. The benches were still there.
It had been closed.
It had been closed for over 30 years and just used for storage, so it was frozen in time. And I got the idea to ask permission to obtain some wood from inside the Barn Nightclub where Aerosmith got their start, and they had hung out as teenagers getting in all kinds of trouble, so I'm told, and get a piece of wood and with the intent of using it as part of a guitar. And so what I'm holding here is a piece of regular old white pine. It looks really dirty. It's got some cracks in it. It's covered with dirt and graffiti.
It's got some chewing gum on the back of it, too.
Yeah,
you're gonna have to
fossilized 30-year-old or older chewing gum is stuck on.
You're going to have to sandblast that off, I think. Yeah.
There it is. It looks like something from a landfill.
Doesn't sound much like a guitar now. So
no.
How do you go from this chunk of wood, though?
We're going to be able to make a guitar that sounds very usable out of this. It basically is going to end up being a thin pine top with the graffiti intact, some of which dates from 1965.
Are you going to be able to leave that on the design then?
I'm going to leave it on there. The entire guitar is going to look very rustic. All the screws and pickup covers, everything will be rusted to look alt. Be able to do a show, with Aerosmith, and it will work very well.
Wow. Well, it's obvious that when you're making these guitars, it takes, a lot of skill, a lot of craftsmanship. I mean, have you ever tried to turn your attention to, say, building a cabinet or making some furniture?
Well, it would be a train wreck if I were to build a cabinet or a piece of furniture or a deck. Oddly enough, I'm used to working in measurements that are measured in the thousandths of an inch, but Keith, if I built a deck on the front of your house, it would probably be several inches or feet too short or too long.
But if I could put 6 strings on it, would that work?
Yes. I'd make sure it would. Lifetime guarantee.
Terry McInturff builds and designs electric guitars. In his studios south of Raleigh, he talked with Keith Weston.